There are plenty of events and plenty of scientists that came about in the couple hundred years of the scientific revolution. Two of the absolute giants were Isaac Newton and Galileo Galilee. Both are worthy of mentioning. It seems like if you're going to have a rounded education, you have to have these two in your brain, and just knowing where they fit in the science scheme during the time. Okay, so Isaac Newton came up with three unbelievably groundbreaking discoveries, ways of thinking, tools. Isaac Newton came up with the 3 laws of motion, which most people have heard in their lives. It's so still in our lives and memorable, right? Memorable. An object in motion stays at motion. An object at rest stays at rest unless it's acted on by an outside force. Force equals mass times acceleration. All it really says is that you can throw a golf ball a lot faster accelerating than a bowling ball because a golf ball is lighter and your arm is the force. I mean, but he did the actual equations that prove it worked. And he also came up with the theory of gravity. Literally, objects attracting each other with gravitational force, okay? Unbelievably groundbreaking and earth-shattering. And then we had the solar system scientists versus the Catholic Church. And it all revolved around the idea that the Catholic Church said the Earth was at the center of the universe. The solar system scientists theorized that the sun was at the center of the solar system. Okay, many other past cultures had put the sun at the center, but we're talking at the time it was so groundbreaking in Western Europe because the Catholic Church was so adamant that the Earth was at the center, and the scientists said the data didn't back that up. And so they came up with the heliocentric theory. There were a few of them: Copernicus, Kepler, and the last one was Galileo Galilee. And he gets the most fame because his statements, his books, because he printed these books and he spread them, that the sun was at the center of the solar system. He went on trial. It was the trial of Galileo. And the church basically forced him to say he was wrong. So in the end, Galileo admitted that he was wrong, even though he and all the other scientists totally believed that Galileo was right, the sun's at the center. Galileo officially said he was wrong and was sentenced to rest of his life house arrest. But he was a very old person. But he did live 7-8 years under house arrest, and it wasn't that bad of a punishment because he could still do his work, he could still write, and at that time he was either going or was basically blind. So being under house arrest, being taken care of by the church, was actually a pretty good retirement for Galileo at the end of his life. So there's a couple things I'd like to mention about the trial of Galileo. I mean, the history of it is interesting enough, but I think it brings up a couple bigger points. Number one, there's a lot of myths around Galileo's life, and if you go and look at primary sources or secondary sources or cartoons on the internet, you never know if you're going to get those myths or if you're not. So it's really kind of interesting because there's controversy of whether he ever really went up on the Leaning Tower of Pisa and dropped a couple objects of differing weights and they hit the ground at the same time. That was one of his things. And people like to tell that story. Very interesting is a myth around this trial. Here, take a look. This is one of the most famous paintings of Galileo's trial. And if you look at other paintings of Galileo's trial and drawings, they have the same theme going on, okay? You see Galileo here, then you see the church officials, and of course there will usually be a guard. And all of these portray Galileo as a strong, defiant figure. One that is proving, even though he's going to admit he's wrong, he's defiant, and he almost as if he's saying, fine, you're the church and you can do what you want to do, but I am right and you are absolutely wrong. That's not how it happens. Galileo was in fear of being excommunicated, and he was a deeply religious man. And so he was absolutely in fear of being sent to hell by the Pope for all eternity. Galileo was not openly defiant of the church. He was very much accepting of his punishments. And so every painting that you see where he is taking it to the church and he is the one starting a revolution, that is not his attitude. And the best that the history can say is that when he left the trial, he muttered under his breath, "But the earth still moves." The best historians can say is that he quietly said something to himself that he was right. And that's not even, we don't even know if that's 100% true. So the image of Hero Galileo, it's just fake news and a myth. I find that fascinating. And finally, the last major thing that's happening, even though all science is exciting and builds upon it, but the last one in the scientific revolution is Western science embraces the scientific method. Something that's been going on for thousands and thousands of years in the history of humanity, civilization, but this is the time when Western civilization really wrote it down and said, this is how we're going to do it, and if you don't do it, we're not really going to take your ideas very seriously. And it has to come, scientific method, many people have already learned about it, okay? It deals with experiment and observation. And you have to see, and the experiment has to work. The experiments have to be repeatable, and they have to be controlled, and it has to be done over and over again. And it has to work. And the key thing is, if you find your ideas don't work, you have to change the ideas because they have to work, or you have to get better experiments. So repeatability, experiment, and observation is where science comes from, not one person's own thought of how the world should work. And that came to be written down and accepted during the scientific revolution. And so those are the three fields that really propelled Western civilization science into the next level.